Okay, hi everyone. So Grace, if you don't mind, go ahead and thank you. And so if you missed it on the screen, just as a reminder, we ask everyone to keep your devices muted just so that we don't pick up on your background noise that might occur as we begin hearing from our panelists and having our conversation for tonight. Also, if you missed it on the screen, we are recording this particular session so that we can share it with more community members who may not be able to join us tonight at this particular time. And so we typically share those through, I think, YouTube a couple of days after this will be complete. And then I just want to make sure that I get it out at the beginning and say thank you, thank you, thank you for your willingness to spend an hour with us tonight on this particular conversation. It's, I think, our third or fourth in the series around the future of safety. Tonight, the question or the prompt is really around who responds to the call. So as a part of PPNA staff, I'm Tabitha Montgomery. I have the pleasure of working with Grace, who's with us tonight, and Hannah and Ashley. And that's all you're gonna really hear from me for the moment. I'm gonna turn it quickly over here to Grace so she can introduce our panelists and we can get right to things. So again, thank you for taking the time to be with us this evening.
Thanks, Tabitha. I'll be really brief in my introductions. I like to let the panelists speak for themselves. So our first panelist tonight is Darrell Gillespie. He's the Dean of Students at Hope Academy and is also a practicing psychotherapist. We also are joined by Kia Bible and Chantal Tousignant, who are the founders of 612 MASH over at George Floyd Square. And also Rocki Simoes, who is the Assistant Director of Community-Based Programs at Avenues for Homeless Youth, which has been a partner org of ours for a couple of years now. So we're really excited to welcome all of them. Rocki, I'm actually gonna start with you if you wanna kick us off. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what your work is.
Sure. Hi, everyone, and thanks PPNA for inviting me to be here tonight on this very snowy evening. Yeah, so I work at Avenues for Youth. We actually changed our names to Avenues for Youth. We dropped the homeless part of it a while back, which I'm really happy about. We work with young folks experiencing homelessness, and that name, Avenues for Homeless Youth, just never felt quite right. So it's not an identity, right? So I am here as definitely as a youth worker, someone who works at Avenues and has been part of the youth work world for over 2 decades now, but also as a Powderhorn Park resident. So I've been in Powderhorn Park for also 2 decades. So this location is near and dear to my heart. And who answers the call? I'm not quite sure I have really great answers to that question, but I have some answers based on my experience as a youth worker. At Avenues, we have 5 programs, and we have been working with young folks since 1994. The organization has been around. As a youth worker, what I have seen, and I've worked specifically with queer youth, most of whom were also youth of color. I have heard time and time again from youth that the systems in which they experienced the most violence were the very systems that many of us actually use to in moments of crises. So queer youth of color have been telling me for decades that they experience a lot of violence at the hands of the police. So I've always known that. I'm really excited that there are many community groups looking at alternatives, at different community responses. Many of the groups are Black-led. So I'm excited to see what emerges as far as ideas, because 911 has never really been a number that most of the youth and community members that I share space with have used. except in medical emergencies. So I want to make that clear. And what I have seen when it comes to youth experiencing homelessness, there is so there's a level of public engagement or being out in the community that maybe is a little bit more public for youth experiencing homelessness than other youth. So I have seen young folks come into contact with law enforcement more often than youth who are housed. And what I've noticed in again, 2 decades, 3 decades of youth work is that young folks experiencing homelessness who are white tend to get funneled into mental health and chemical dependency worlds, while BIPOC youth, Black, Indigenous, POC youth get funneled into the juvenile justice system. So that has been a trend. So that, you know, that funneling, that pipeline has been a trend that I think many people have noticed. And obviously that has a huge impact on later ability to get employment and housing. And so that's one of the ways that I've seen the impact of certain systems in young folks' lives. And youth workers have always answered the call, you know, from young folks. We have young folks calling us for all sorts of reasons. First and foremost, to look for housing, but a lot of times it's around mental health. It's around suicide. As when I was program manager of one of our host home programs that's specifically for queer youth, a lot of times I was on the phone with young folks who, instead of calling 911, would call me or would call a trusted person in the community to talk through their feelings, what they were thinking about doing, so that we would make plans. So there's definitely a place for trained community members to respond to the call, especially around mental health. But I also have heard from outreach workers that they're tired and stretched thin. So what does it mean for us to look to them to also maybe take up more calls, right? So there would need to be a reshifting of our systems, of our existing systems, to provide more resources, more training to community members who want to respond, to be able to do that. I think there are many folks who want to be a part of that. So I know my 5 minutes are almost up, so I'll stop there because I know there'll be opportunities for Q&As. The last thing I will say before I go is that one of the things that I want to tell community is that you can open up your homes to young folks experiencing homelessness. We do have a program called Connect that is for LGBTQ youth, most of whom are youth of color, because a lot of the times when 911 gets called, it's community people calling on our young folks who are experiencing homelessness. And if we actually had more housing for them, perhaps that wouldn't be happening quite as much. So I'll end there with that plug.
Thanks so much, Rocki. Darrell, I'm going to pass it to you. Introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about what brings you into the space tonight.
Well, I want to say thank you to Power Home Neighborhood Association for allowing me a chance to come and interact. I'm here because I was asked to come. I would consider myself a lover of community. I am actually a North Sider, but I'm still here tonight. I work at Hope Academy as the Dean of Students for K-5 students. I'm also a psychological therapist. I work for Bracken Psychological Services as well as Aruba Emotional Health. And I'm also the pastor and founder of Proverbs Christian Fellowship. Just a quick history of Proverbs. Proverbs was founded at 3422 10th Avenue South. So we were founded in Powderhorn neighborhood. So that's where our church got its start 17 years ago. So I'm here tonight to try to shed some light on what I think about first responders and who should respond and all that good stuff. So of course, with all the things that I do, I have a lot of lenses to look through. And so when I got the initial question about my understanding and experience and stance for first responders, the first thing that I thought about was police and paramedics and firemen and people that come to the scene of crimes or accidents or something like that. And I was like, well, I'm a first responder too. As a therapist, as a pastor, I get stuff when people are at their wits' end. Sometimes they've never dealt with, as you say, Rocki, the mental health piece, and they come to talk, and I get a chance to respond in a way that's hopefully helpful. And so as I thought about this initial question, and if I sound churchy tonight, you all, it's not churchy in a way to bring you all into salvation, but it is a way to talk as if I have to understand that I am a community's pastor, whether they come to our church or not. I am responsible for my brothers and sisters wherever I go, because that, I believe, is my call to be a first responder. And so a couple of words came to my mind, and I'll be done. The first word is awareness. I think if we're going to be effective first responders, we have to be, first of all, aware of our own biases, our own strengths, our own weaknesses, our own hangups, our own issues, and all of that. I think that plays a huge role as we think about helping or responding or reacting to anybody. I think we also should be aware that a lot of people have a lot of stuff going on, and some people are in situations that they have no control over. Some people don't want to be in the situations they're in. Some people are doing things that are criminal, and some people are surviving. And I think a sense of awareness and how we react plays a huge role in the temperature or whatever we bring to a certain situation. And I'm going past those others. I'm looking at our own self as the first responders. And I would lastly say compassion. I think compassion gives us the ability to not only have sympathy and empathy, but it gives us the ability to act in a way that's totally helpful, where I can help somebody who doesn't have the same thoughts, the same ethnicity, the same ideologies, even whatever it is, because I know that people we're all in this thing together. And I am no better than my brother or my sister. And if somebody is hurting, I'm hurting too, whether I realize it or not. And so as we are first responders, we have to have a communal attitude where we're looking for the betterment of everybody. And I think that helps this whole process of responding to situations. And it gives us not an unrealistic viewpoint, but it gives us a healthy viewpoint. And hopefully we'll have some healthy outcomes as we respond in a respectful, loving way for the better good of everybody.
Thanks so much, Darrell. All right, and last but certainly not least, we have Chantal and Kia with 612 MASH. Unfortunately, they do not get to cheat and have 5 minutes each, but we'll be really excited to hear what they have to say and what they're bringing into the space.
Great, I'll just give it all to Chantal. Go ahead, Chantal. I'm Kia. I am the co-founder of 612 MASH alongside of Jackie Kowicki, whom unfortunately cannot be here due to being ill. So I have my handy dandy partner over here, Chantal, to help with a lot of the work that we do. 612 MASH is the nonprofit medical entity that has arisen out of the uprising and are looking for better ways to actually bridge these gaps that we're talking about that we already have with our first responders. I think a big part of that really boils down to community health workers. Community health workers are health workers that have been members of a community, that have been chosen or appointed into that position by their community to be able to provide basic first aid, to be able to provide medical care, or giving them resources to be able to have access to healthcare. And, providing different types of preventative care as well. Everybody, as we've already heard across the list so far, it's mental health. mental health is really severe within the communities that we live in because of the oppression and the trauma that we're consistently under on a daily basis. So having people that are already in the community that have created a bond with people, who have formed relationships with people that they feel comfortable enough to come to have conversations about their mental health without even having conversations, quote unquote, about their mental health. Because you can have a conversation with somebody and be helping them with their mental health without them even knowing that that's what you're doing. And so, like Darrell was saying, being a pastor, you're responsible for your people. And as a community, we shouldn't just say that we're a community. It's not just a word. It's an actual action. We are a community, and we have to wholeheartedly be invested in this. And I think that's one of the biggest flaws that we have right now as humans. It's not being wholeheartedly invested. A lot of the times people forget that, for instance, with firefighters, those people are volunteers. There's a paycheck that comes involved with EMS. There's a paycheck that comes involved with our police. And again, referring back to what Darrell said too, of, one, being held accountable and being aware of what it is that you're actually doing, because you cannot walk into a situation where you're dealing with somebody else's mental health and have a biased opinion about that person and expect to be able to actually help them. So I think it's just a lot of self-work that we need to do, and then work on our own individual communities. And community is not just within a 4-block radius. Community is reaching over to North Minneapolis. Community is reaching out to St. Paul. Community is the Twin Cities. And that is the community that we're a part of. So it's just a matter of, embracing where we come from, where we're at, and where the heck we're going to from here. And if we're stronger with numbers, we can't stress that enough. We're stronger with numbers, especially within the BIPOC community. We know we have those numbers. It's just a matter of being comfortable with stating some of the things that we're afraid to even confront, because confrontation sucks and change is hard. But hey, that's, I think, what we're up against at this point. So it's either we poop or get off the pot, better for terms. So I guess with that, I will leave it with that, unless you have anything you want to add in on there.
Yeah, we've been in the George Floyd Square for the last, going on 5 months. I think we're well over 144 days, I think is today.
Yep.
And we've given, such a variety of care to not only the, the visitors that come into this space, but also, especially for the residents and the people who are, stakeholders here. And just finding that, again, like breaking away from that traditional care is really the key to getting people the resources that they need. And first and foremost, putting how the culture of a community would accept care over what we think is best. Like we, allow that to be directed by the people who are receiving that care. And that's something that we've been able to put into practice at George Floyd Square. And we can see how that's been successful. And we'd like to see that, repeated in other, South Minneapolis neighborhoods and other North Minneapolis neighborhoods, and, expanding even beyond that. Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much for joining our conversation tonight. And I'm going to pass it over to Tabitha.
Great. And what's so great about it is I think that you, in many ways, already answered the first question that we're going to tee up. So I'm just going to maybe restate some of the instructions to all the attendees tonight, that if you have a question for the panel, now would be a great time to start typing it into the chat. And Grace will help us to bring as many of those questions forward as we throw out 1 or 2 questions to get us going. And so the first question, and I think that, again, because I heard a lot of resources that you've already articulated, that I'm hoping you can kind of restate or emphasize their importance, and really maybe focus on what do you think it would take to bring that resource into the community in a way that makes a difference, that people could feel that resource being a part of this solution. So it goes about what first response resources are the communities missing, and what models would you advocate for? And I would say advocate for with community. So again, what are the first response resources missing in our communities? And what would you advocate for personally? And maybe from the standpoint of what do you think we would be most effective at focusing on as a community in partnership with your advocacy for those resources. So I'm going to start with Rocki, then I'm going to go back over to 612 MASH, so Kia and Chantal, and then we'll wrap up with you, Darrell, if that's okay. So Rocki, you said a couple of things in your initial response. And so again, even if it's restating it and helping us to understand why those resources, in your opinion, are so important as a part of a response approach.
Yeah, I think it makes a huge difference for, and again, my lens is very much from the youth worker world. So I don't know that much about, I mean, I know about the adult world because I am one and I live in community, but as far as the work, yeah, to have community folks that we can call in a crisis and know that they're going to show up without the police. I love COPE. I love the idea of COPE, which is the community outreach, psychiatric. I always forget what COPE stands for. Psychiatric. What's the E? Emergency. Psychiatric emergency. Yeah. So community outreach. Yeah. Psychiatric emergency. It's a Hennepin County response team that can come to folks that are having psychiatric emergencies, mental health crises, but sometimes they can show up with the police. So I have worked with many young folks and also with colleagues and with community friends and community members who have not called COPE because they were afraid that the police would show up. So I think we definitely need crisis responders for mental health emergencies that are completely separate from the police, so that people know folks are going to show up and the police will not be involved. And what was the second part of the question?
So how would you advocate for that? So it sounds like that is a resource that you've identified. You also mentioned in some of your earlier comments about housing and how critical access to housing is. And so again, just to try to restate some of the ideas that you've already shared, if those are important, are those things that you think that we can advocate for to make a difference in community?
For sure. So I think we need more of what we already have, and then we need new things completely different than what we have. It's a both and. There's an app that we often give out to community. It's called ysnmn.org. Well, that's a website, but you can go there, and it stands for Youth Services Network, MN for Minnesota. And in real time, you can see who the street outreach workers are right now, what beds are available in what shelter, where there are food shelves, all of that stuff. It's a very user-friendly, and you can also download the app on your phone. So I think for any community member in Powderhorn and anywhere else to have that on their phone so they can easily access to it if they're talking to a young person who needs those resources. We need more of that. We need, we need more host homes. I know I always plug that in, but if there are folks out there who have an extra bedroom or an extra space to share your home with, in our program, it's queer and trans youth of color, mostly. That would be lovely. Please contact Avenues for Youth, because again, having a safe place to sleep at night makes a huge difference in whether or not you have to engage with other systems that are potentially violent for queer and trans youth of color. So I hope I answered the question. More trained community members, more resources, and there's no there's no scarcity. There are a lot of folks who want to do this work. So I think there's no shortage of inspirational work out there right now to look to, and that's hopeful for me.
Yeah, And Chantal, why don't you take it from there? What are your thoughts about the resources, some that you could have already articulated that's needed, and what you would advocate for?
Well, I'd like to say that I agree with what Rocki was just saying. That's a kind of a lot of the work that we have done out here is similar to some of the things that they've already stated for the resources that are needed. And of course it is a both and, because there are some that need to be, put into play, such as 612 MASH, being able to bridge gaps that are already there in the health field that need to be bridged. One of the main things I think is community building and establishing trust between patients and providers. And in order to do that, you need to be feet on the ground, out here shaking hands, making a friend, getting to know a person personally, not just them coming in and telling you, oh, well, my grandma had diabetes and my aunt had, sickle cell. You know what I mean? Like that's simple. But at the same time, we need to be able to respect community boundaries and the cultural norms, and being able to establish something in those particular environments that are going to benefit that particular space, and securing safe spaces such as, places for our homeless youth to go to. I actually have a 16-year-old that is staying with a cousin of mine because family put them out and they had nowhere to go, and they were out here in the square and were gravely injured. And so we've had them under our wing for the past 2.5 months. But what resources are there? Again, COPE was not an option because of the scare, them being afraid of police. And unfortunately, the police are not going to come out here and shake hands. I remember when I was growing up, the police were handing out baseball cards and stickers out the trunk of their cars. They don't do that anymore. They don't even carry that in the trunk of their cars. They have extra things that don't necessarily benefit our youth or our communities. And then, of course, the continuing cash flow, or the funds for operating things like this. Where do we get these resources for if the city always wants to have their hand in the pot, and when they do, they have the final say on how things run? But if that doesn't work for that community, how does that benefit that community? And it's just appointing those leaders in the community and finding them and allowing them to stand up and, take charge. I think people that actually have the initiative and take the initiative to do it, and put their best foot forward is our bottom line. Because there's people here that want to do it, and there's people that have the resources. It's just being able to have the platform to work on. And I think the sad part is that George Floyd had to die for us to be able to have these conversations again that we've been having for the past 400 plus years, even on how we make our land safe and comfortable to live in. And it's 10 times harder for people in the BIPOC community. So how do we make them be able to breathe again is, I think, really what the bottom question is, besides these two here.
After that, or?
Okay.
Yeah, no, I think, a big thing that we've seen, again, just to echo, because I think it's critical, is just mental health care. And I think that kind of feeds into the other point that I want to make too, in regards to preventative healthcare, which, so much of what we have as a society is, very much so like response prompted, where, a situation is happening. And so we send people out because, we need to respond to it right away. Whereas if we can anticipate the issues of a community and know, historically what that community has endured, we're going to be better able to treat people, with preventative mental health care, and then bringing it to the physical side of healthcare, learning what ailments tends to affect, different populations within your community, and learning, how to treat those things before they become, gigantic problems that are, scary and expensive and dangerous. So yeah, just sort of being, proactive over reactive when it comes to the care of our communities. That's going to save, I think, a lot of people from a lot of trauma.
Thank you. And Darrell, what are your thoughts in terms of those types of first response resources needed?
So Kia took all my answers, but I'm gonna try not to be long-winded on my answer. So the first thing that comes to my mind is leaders have to be about it. And I think leadership being about it is about what is your motivation for really building community. And so one thing Kia said in her first answer was that conflict sucks. And I think one of the things that about conflict sucking is we don't have a lot of neighborhoods don't have a sense of community. And so how do we create, first of all, a sense of community that will provide a safe space that will give us a chance to build some bridges? And so one of the things that I've tried to do, so our church, we were in Harrison neighborhood, we've been in Harrison neighborhood, we've been in Jordan, and now we're in Falwell. And I have always we've always had a person from our church that has been on the board of each neighborhood association. And we're doing that because we're trying to build relationships, not about people joining our church, but connecting with community so we can have conversations, so we can talk about what's needed, so we can know what's going on, so we can kind of be able to figure out how do we do this. Another thing that I've done here lately is, so y'all know there's been a lot of shooting in North Minneapolis. I partnered with, oh my God, Urban Homeworks. And so I did some healing circles in some of their properties where shootings were prevalent and people were scared. And one of the things I found out was that neighbors don't know neighbors. And so why don't all the neighborhood associations even have Zoom calls like this? And maybe they do, but are they advertising? How are we having a chance to have some dialogue where we can have some conflict? But what the biggest thing I found out was how people are afraid of the police and they feel so powerless. And there's something about coming together, bringing some ideas to the table that brings power. For one of the circles I did, all they wanted was a green man to come to put up a green man so they could stop the cars from driving so fast down the street so the kids could come outside and play. But they didn't feel like they had enough power within their community to go to the right people and ask. But if I'm going to be a leader, I need to be able to do the grunt work to get out here and sit down, that monotonous hard work, but I'm getting information and I'm empowering people, whether it's 5 or 6 people. We can't worry about numbers. We just have to create a place to be safe, to verbalize what's going on. And once people start verbalizing like we're doing tonight, ideas come, strength comes, and the empower comes, because now the word accountability, we can hold people accountable. And it's not about big eyes and little U's. It's about, let's get this done. Let's build ourselves. Let's come together to do something great. And so, and that's a simple resource, I think, that goes underutilized, because I don't think we think it has to be so grand and so big, but it doesn't. It can start small and it can catch on like wildfire. And so the first thing I think, we need to come together. We need to hear everybody's voice, whether we have conflict or not, whether we look different or not, whether our theological ideologies are different. So what? We still all have a common goal of wanting our neighborhoods to be safe. We want people to have what they need. And so again, and I'll shut up on this, the Church of Acts, in Acts 2, it talks about they had all things in common. They came together and they broke bread. They brought all their resources together. So whatever you needed, if I had it, you had it. If somebody else needed it, we bring our stuff together so we help one another. And I think that might sound so simple, but I think it has results that will help these other first responders continue to do. Because if they know we together, you better believe, like Kia was talking about, now since 38th Street, the fire department comes there now. If they know Powderhorn neighborhood is together and they are connected, we will get some responses, and they will kick in.
Thank you. So, listen, the question that we originally had teed up for you guys, I think that you've already answered it. So before we segue to community questions, and I think we'll have closer to probably 15 or 20 minutes for those. My question is really around, given the fact that it feels like all of our panelists are certainly pro various responses to meeting our community needs where they're at, what do you say about not that you need to know perfectly how long it will take for us to get these systems in place. But what do you say about what do we do as we're waiting for some of this change to take place in our community? What are your thoughts in terms of how can the community prepare, or what should we expect, or how do we manage our behavior as we're waiting for some of the change that you've discussed or described as needed? So Kia and Chantal, I'll go to you. Darrell, I'll come back over to you, and then we'll end with you, Rocki.
Well, I guess it kind of sucks that it's snowing now, because I would say come down to 38th in Chicago.
You still can.
You still can, very much so, because just like Darrell said, it's being able to go to your community and know the member that you need to speak to get the resource that you need. And I often refer 38th in Chicago, George Floyd Square now, to the Apple River. Have you ever flowed down Apple River? If not, the saying is that everybody on the river is your friend. You bump into somebody, if you need a soda bottle, they're going to give you a bottle of soda. They're going to give you a cigarette. They're going to give you a lighter. They're going to give you a high five if that's what you're looking for. And here you have that in this community where you can walk up and say, hey, I need to figure out where I can get some snow pants from. 2 phone calls later, they're like, hey, I got somebody on the way up here to bring snow pants for you and your 4 kids. You know what I mean? Like, where does that happen at? In small towns and small villages. And we have that privilege to have that here at George Floyd Square. So what do you want to do in the meantime? Come and stand in solidarity down here at George Floyd Square and get some of those lessons firsthand, because you have that down here. You can shake a hand and make a friend, and you can get a resource that you never thought even existed from somebody down here, because they know somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody. Yeah. And that's really where it starts.
Yeah. And then, you know, another thing that you can do too, and it sounds so simple and it was already touched on, but like just getting to know your neighbors. It is so powerful to have, you know, a connection with the people who live near you, because, you know, in my neighborhood right here in the square, you know, if we have a situation, we've got a little group chat that somebody sends out a message and is like, hey, I saw this suspicious thing. Anybody else see it? And then instantly, you know, you've got 2 or 3 other neighbors that are peeking out their window to make sure that, you know, everybody's okay. And so, you know, even just for less serious things, like knowing the people around you makes you feel less alone and less isolated,
and safe,
which I think is important for all of us, you know, especially considering everything that's happened, you know, in the last few years, but specifically the last couple months.
What are your thoughts on what do people do while we're waiting for all these system changes? Yep, Darrell, you're on mute.
Okay, I got you. So one of the things, when I hear the word wait, I think somebody hear the word wait, it just means just to like wait in line, like just standing. And I think we are supposed to go down to 38th Street, go to wherever your neighborhood is. And I think we are supposed to be in solidarity with each other, and we're supposed to connect and all that. But I think we also need to have some expectations for those who are in control of these systems, for our elected officials, our police sergeants. I mean, I think we really have to start to talk about how do we train and retrain? What are the policies that are holding your responses? How do you all do what you do? When Kia talks about the policemen used to pass out baseball cards or do that, and PAL, Police Athletic League, I mean, all these ways to build relationships. What are we need to hold the police accountable for what they are supposed to be doing. I believe in any kind of police situation, you're supposed to build relationships. Wouldn't it be better to have a police? I grew up in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, and I lived right next door to a police officer. And he was one of the nicest men I ever knew. And he was an African-American police officer back in the 60s. And so my mindset of a police has always been a friendly face, a person who you can build relationships with. So as I've grown older and seen this disconnect with police, maybe how they're trained, how the world has happened, we have the power to change or even try to hold accountable. They can get mad at us, but it is our due diligence to say, hey, we have to do something different. Have you all thought about this? And that's why I say coming together, getting ideas, going, talking to people in power, challenging our Congress, our city council members to look at things from a different way. We may, again, if we feel powerless and say, well, our voice doesn't count, if we always hold on to that mentality, there'll never be a change. So while we're waiting, because we know change can be slow, but it doesn't have to be slow. It doesn't have to be, some things can be expedient. And right now, because of all the things that's going on and how I believe our mayor and our city officials have an open ear to hear kind of what's coming from the ground up. But if we never say anything, if we just stay stagnant and don't talk about what's going on. And what's interesting, I'm sure Powderhorn has different things that's going on in Falwell, and Falwell has different things that's going on in Seward. But we all have to hold them accountable, and we should be concerned about all them neighborhoods, because what happens in Powderhorn affects where I live in near North. And so we have to know this is a collective. And so if one neighborhood gets it going, hopefully that neighborhood person can pass it on to the next one, and we can keep kind of empowering each other to hold those who are in charge of some of these systems to make some changes.
Thank you. And Rocki, we'll just ask you to finish up on that question. What's your thought?
Well, you know, I listened to the last panel that you had, and one of your speakers, Janelle was her name, she said something, one of her quotes, and I actually wrote it down because I thought it was great. It takes no time at all and all the time in the world. It's a both and. I think there are decisions that have happened in the last 6 months that I've witnessed that I never thought I would see in my lifetime. And yet culturally, I haven't seen transformation. So I don't know if I'll see that in my lifetime. So I think there are policy changes that are happening, but there's also a lot of backsliding. And I think what really needs to change in order for things to happen more quickly is that whiteness needs to get out of the way. Funding needs, and philanthropy, money needs to go to folks that have been doing we've been taking care of each other since we've been on this planet. Like, there's nothing new about what we're talking about. However, most of our communities have been under-resourced in many ways. We've been scrappy. What would it mean for money to flow into those communities with no strings attached? Yeah, what would that look like? And we live in Minnesota, right? I've talked a lot about this, and many of us have, that this is the land of white liberalism, where you know, a lot of good has been done in the name of charity, and charity has never been and never will be about solidarity and transformation. So I think until we have that cultural change, and that's the quote from Janelle that resonated with me, that will take all the time in the world. And yet there are things that are happening now that it's about the decisions we make, and it's happening now, and it's instant. It's a both and. So that's kind of a rambling answer to your question. I feel hopeful some days about the changes, but I don't always believe that the change will lead to transformation. I kind of sometimes lean into cynicism that the change will go right back to what it used to be. So it's not true transformation. And on a good day, I feel like we're getting there. We're getting there. So, but it's people power. It's old school base building, like Mr. Gillespie was talking about, like, you know, Kia and Chantal were talking about, like it's about talking to our neighbors and talking to our people, and not shying away from really difficult conversations, and building relationships and building trust. What is that quote? You know, there's another quote, like, change happens at the speed of trust. And trust takes time. And there are things that need to happen now. Both and.
And just two seconds, please. I want to say that in the meantime, while waiting, go and watch Chicago 7. I think it'll give people a very good insight on what this movement is about, because it's very similar, even though Chicago 7 was to end the Vietnam War. It's on Netflix, and I think it gives a lot of good insight to what we're trying to do with our first responders, with what we're doing here, just everything all over. It's worth watching.
Yeah. So one of the community questions around like how is how would the panelists qualify, contract, and employ additional first responder options or services 24 hours a day, 365 days a year to achieve true sustainable alternatives to armed police responses within our existing 911 first responder system? So I know that was a lot, so I'm just going to repeat that. So how would the panelists qualify, contract, and employ additional first responders and options and services 24 hours a day, 365 days a year to achieve true sustainable alternatives to armed police responses within our existing 9/11 first responder system? So again, I know there's a lot there, but if you could just maybe take, and I hate to do that, but maybe 60 seconds each of you to kind of talk through where you think we might start with that particular question. So Rocki, I'll ask you maybe to go first, and Darrell, and then we'll come back to Kia and Chantal.
Yeah, so I know that there are quite a few community response projects that are emerging right now, that are actually planning exactly that. What would it look like? How much would it cost? How many people? How many hours a day? 324 hours a day, 365 days. So I don't have. I know that those groups are doing that. I am not in the middle of any of those groups. Most of them are BIPOC led. So I think there's a lot more information that's going to be coming in the near future that's going to emerge about that. And so I'm excited, and I don't have concrete numbers or anything like that.
Darrell, what are your thoughts?
So I would spend more time with qualifying them. And I think qualifying equates proper training. And I think training is I think it's ongoing. Just like we have CEUs, we get continuing education. I think we have to continue. That goes back to the awareness I'm talking about. For somebody to have a job as critical as what that question is talking about, you have to know where you're at. You really have to know where you're at. And you have to have an open mind to be able to accept where everybody else is, even when they don't agree. I think sometimes when people are put in positions where they are trying to help somebody, they may want to help them the way they want to be helped, or may help them the way that they think they should help, without being aware about what a person really, really needs. And I think it takes real training. We talk about being culturally competent, and you got to be culturally competent too, but you have to be emotionally competent and aware too, because the same problem for a Black person, every Black person doesn't have the same problem. And it can't just be one way fixes all of that, or one white person, or one Native person, or even one homeless person. And I think that training has to be, the trainer has to be so astute in building up, giving persons case studies, giving person ideologies that they continue to look at themselves. And if we get somebody that's properly trained to do this, I honestly say the contract, the money they ask for, we can't put a number on that, because they're invaluable. To have somebody that can be non-judgmental, to be accepting, and be able to offer some hope with some high expectations, that's an amazing person, and that's going to be an effective person as well.
Thank you, Darrell. And then lastly, Kia and Chantal, what are your thoughts on that particular question?
Well, I think, like what Rocki said, there are some of those things that are already being started, which are the Freedom Fighters, Agape, Minneapolis Us. They're there to be a buffer beforehand, and they are faces that look just like ours, that make it a little bit more comfortable. They're not walking around in heavy uniforms, but at the same time, being able to make that be something sustainable as an alternative really comes down to the training, really comes down to having that resource actually be fully equipped to handle the responsibilities of what a community is really seeking right now, with feeling safe in their communities versus the police. Because at one point in time, they weren't called the police. They were called, they were peace protectors or peacemakers. Like it wasn't police. Now they're policing, and that's where the issues are coming into place. So we need to find something that isn't so much of a policing tactic, but actually getting to figure out doing the due diligence on what the actual issues are that continuously arise in the communities that we have them.
And we as communities can hold our city and our county accountable, and, request from them to pull funding from systems that we see aren't working, take that funding and dedicate it into, new systems and community-based systems. We talk about like, well, where's the money going to come from? Where's the money going to come from? And, well, it already exists, just needs to be reallocated.
Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, with police, I feel like right now, one of the biggest problems is that your average civilian is held to a higher standard of accountability than our people that enforce the law. They can shoot somebody and be like, oh, well, I thought that was the way I was supposed to handle it. But because of police immunity, it doesn't matter. They can be ignorant to the law and it not affect them. Where if we are ignorant to the law of simply jaywalking, we can be ticketed and you're held accountable no matter what, even if you didn't know. So I think that we can't have somebody that's holding us accountable not be on the same level of learning as us, or they need to be on a higher level of learning than us to be able to enforce something that we don't know.
Okay, so the next question, thank you everyone, is what are the resources, you may know this or we can follow up with this person later, but what are the resources for a 23-year-old person dealing with schizophrenia? They indicate that the person is Black, but they don't know necessarily if they identify as a part of the LGBTQ community. I think that they were just sharing that for some context. So does anyone on the panel, and I'll just open that up, know about potential resources for a young person, 23 years old, who is dealing with schizophrenia?
I guess I would ask the question, have they been diagnosed with schizophrenia so they know they have that? I would also ask, are they on medication and are they taking their medication? And is the medication working or not? And if the medication is not working, I would offer them to go talk to another psychiatrist. And if they are looking for therapists of color, they may not be, but if they are, I got 2 agencies that could definitely help them. Bracken Psychological Services is located in Plymouth. They're doing telehealth now. Aruba Emotional Services have therapists of color. They have therapists that are LGBTQ. They have both places have those that are open to those types of issues. So that's what I would offer right off the top.
I think those are great. And I think that what we can do, I'm going to see if we can get in another question in the last few minutes here, and we will share those references that you provided, Darrell. So to prevent further harm, trauma, this is the question, I'm sorry. To prevent further harm, trauma, and tragedy, how do you vet community members who claim to have the qualifications to address mental health or other issues, or who offer to take youth in if you don't know them personally? So I'll repeat that question. It looks like they're asking, to prevent further harm, trauma, and tragedy, how do you vet community members who claim to have the qualifications to address mental health and other issues? So how do you know as a community member or a person if they're engaging or interacting with someone within the community who says, hey, I can help? What should maybe you be asking for to know that they can actually offer the help that they are suggesting they can provide? Darrell, I'm going to start with you, given your background, and then if everyone else has other thoughts, please chime in.
So the first thing I would ask them to is give a portfolio. What have you done? What is your track record? Who have you worked with? And again, somebody could always get the yearbook answer. They could say they work with this community and that community and what they did. So then you talk about what did you do? And then start talking about what is your expectations. And I think expectation is a great question, because hopefully expectation will kind of tell you what people think and how they plan to do something different. I also think that people who are vetting a particular person, you have to have people from all walks of life. And what I mean by that is children, high school, children's school, different ethnicities, different sexual orientation. I think you have to have a gamut of people to ask particular questions so you can get a view. And the hard thing about that question is somebody can be so skilled at giving answers and giving all this stuff. I believe there also is a place that we all know what I'm getting ready to say. There's a place in our gut that really tells us if somebody is legit or not. And I don't think we ever should ignore what our gut tells us sometimes. I don't care how good a person sounds or how educated they are. Sometimes something in our gut says there's a red flag, leave it alone. And we can't really articulate that, but I think that should be a gauge for some of these decisions as we deal with our community. One of the things we talked about before the people came was, and I guess how I frame this in my mind is, how do you get to somebody's genuineness? How do you know that? And can that be taught? I don't think to care about a community, I'm not gonna say it can't be taught, but some of this stuff is innate in us that we really love people. And again, to be able to articulate that, I don't care what y'all say about me. I'm gonna tell you one thing you will know from tonight. You know I love people. I love them. And I know it exudes from me because I do. I can't hide it. I love people. And I think that's an important thing to think about when you're vetting somebody. What do you feel on top of all the answers and all the showboating that they could or could not do?
Is it okay if I jump in real quick?
Yes, please.
Because I saw that the question also asked about people who open up their homes. So I just want to say that specifically with Connect, we have at least 2 or 3 interviews, and we ask for references, we do all of the checks that are necessary, but then we spend 16 hours together and have training and then ongoing training as well. But only after all of that process do we get to say, yes, you're a host now, or here's why you're not a host. And we've said that to people. So that is a very serious process and a very intense process for hosting. And yeah.
Thank you. Aaron, I see your hand, but we're at time. We're at 7 o'clock and I want to honor everybody's time tonight. I know that we went over a little bit. I definitely want to thank our panelists for sharing and for you taking time to be with us tonight. I know we never get to all the questions that the community has, and sometimes what we've attempted to do is to share those questions with the panelists after the fact and ask that if you could put a few thoughts to the questions that we didn't get to, so then we can share that back out with the notes. We know everybody is busy, and we know it's one additional ask of you, but we would appreciate you if you would at least consider it and look at it and see if you could share that information. But we definitely appreciate everybody, again, taking another hour. I see hearts, so I'm assuming those are big yeses and all around. And then we will be in touch with more. So there we go. We have a full flush. So we will definitely share this information back out to the community as quickly as we're able. Thank you all for attending tonight. We really appreciate you again taking the time to be a part of these conversations that I think are so critical to how we move forward with respect to what new ways that we approach safety in our community. How do we get to where we all want to go? And I hope part of that answer is together. So thank you all for being here tonight. Have a great evening.